On a desolate road within the wildlife reserve, a cry pierced the stillness, echoing with despair. Nearby, a massive wild horse with a glossy reddish-brown coat and a long mane billowing gently in the breeze came to an abrupt halt. Its sharp ears twitched toward the sound, and its deep, piercing eyes seemed to analyze the unfolding situation. In an instant, as though compelled by some unseen force, it charged toward the sound with astonishing speed, its powerful hooves tearing into the ground. What happened next would leave you breathless, unable to tear your eyes away, hanging on to every second. That morning, the reserve seemed like a serene painting, bathed in the soft hues of dawn. Keanu sat on the wooden porch of his cabin, a modest sanctuary tucked into the endless wilderness of the savannah. Before him, the sun peeked over the horizon, its first rays stretching out gently to drape the landscape in a golden glow. The tall grasses, still heavy with night dew, sparkled like diamonds and swayed lightly in the cool breeze. In the distance, under the shade of an ancient acacia tree, Blaze, Keanu's beloved horse, stood motionless, a picture of majestic tranquility. Its stance exuded pride, with its black mane flowing subtly in the wind. Its strong legs occasionally twitched, as if in a dream, galloping across endless fields. The tree's long shadow stretched protectively over Blaze, enhancing the scene's quiet harmony. Keanu lifted his now cold cup of coffee to his lips, savoring the faint aroma that lingered. His gaze softened as it settled on Blaze, and a quiet smile played across his sun-weathered face. "Dreaming of your wild adventures again, aren't you, Blaze?" he murmured, as though the horse could understand. Blaze didn't respond, remaining still. But Keanu knew the horse was always listening, ever attuned to even the faintest of sounds. 19 years had passed since that fateful day, the day when a young, inexperienced Keanu first set foot in this land with a burning passion to protect nature. The image of a frail foal trembling beside its mother's lifeless body, cruelly taken by poachers, was etched deeply in his memory. Blaze, too weak to survive on its own, had become his first and most consuming responsibility in this new life. Many sleepless nights were spent nursing the foal back to health, keeping it warm and nurturing it back to life, day by day, month by month. Now Blaze was more than just part of the reserve. It was a symbol of resilience. Every time Keanu prepared to patrol the boundaries, Blaze was ready, his steadfast companion. But this morning when Keanu called out, "Come on, Blaze, time to go," the horse stood lazily in place, its ears flicking as if weighing the invitation. Keanu laughed, the sound light and free, blending into the stillness of the savannah. Placing his empty cup on the porch, he grabbed his binoculars and made his way toward the jeep. Underfoot, the dry soil crunched faintly, and the surrounding air seemed unnaturally quiet, as if nature itself were holding its breath. Keanu paused for a moment, his eyes scanning northward, toward the fence weakened by recent rains. He knew well that this peace wasn't always guaranteed, but with Blaze by his side, he felt an unshakable confidence, ready for whatever lay ahead. Climbing into the jeep, Keanu cast a quick glance toward the old acacia tree. Blaze, his magnificent stallion, now stood alert under its shade, those deep black eyes locked onto Keanu with a knowing intensity. Its regal posture radiated strength, muscles rippling as it stretched, each movement a fluid testament to its vitality. Slowly, the horse began walking toward the vehicle, its steps deliberate, the tall grasses bowing slightly in its wake. "Changed your mind, huh?" Keanu chuckled, a smile filled with understanding. The jeep's engine roared to life, breaking the stillness of the morning on the savannah plains. Together, he and Blaze headed northward, where the horizon blurred under the relentless glare of the rising sun. The scenery around them was like a living painting, vast fields of golden grass shimmering under the sunlight like rolling waves, dotted with occasional acacia trees that punctuated the expansive wilderness. The air carried the dry scent of earth, mixed with the faint fragrance of wildflowers, a reminder of the land's untamed beauty. Yet Keanu's mind wasn't entirely at ease. His mood grew somber as they approached the northern boundary. He remembered clearly repairing the fence just a week ago, but the fresh tracks nearby hinted at unwelcome visitors. Keanu brought the jeep to a halt and jumped onto the ground, binoculars swinging against his chest. Blaze strode ahead, nostrils flaring as it cautiously sniffed the air. "What's out there?" Keanu muttered, his eyes sweeping the horizon. Before them, the savanna stretched endlessly, the tall grasses shimmering like countless golden blades under the blazing sun. Though Keanu spotted nothing unusual, Blaze's heightened alertness made him pause. The horse's ears flattened, and its body tensed like a coiled spring ready to unleash. "What is it, boy?" Keanu murmured, reaching for his radio. But moments later, Blaze unexpectedly relaxed, its tail flicking dismissively. Turning back to Keanu, the horse seemed to say there was nothing to worry about after all. "Chasing shadows again, huh?" Keanu muttered, suppressing a smile. But deep down, the unease in his chest lingered. The rest of the morning was spent inspecting fences, reinforcing weak spots and searching for any new signs of intrusion. Blaze lounged nearby, lazily watching, its thick mane swaying gently in the wind. While its demeanor appeared calm, Keanu's thoughts were consumed by the growing threat of poachers. The reserve was his life, and the thought of any creature here falling victim to greed and violence ignited a fire within him. By the time the work was done, the sun hung high, casting a searing heat over the plains. Blaze trotted ahead as they made their way back to the jeep, its tail swishing rhythmically. "Time for lunch, huh?" Keanu called, laughing as he climbed into the driver's seat. Blaze, uninvited yet completely at home, broke into a swift gallop, as if challenging the jeep to a race. Keanu glanced at Blaze, shaking his head slightly. "What a mischievous boy," he said, half joking, half serious. Before driving back to the cabin, the surroundings remained eerily still. Too still. A lingering sense of unease rippled through him. As the jeep came to a stop, Blaze trotted up behind it, his breath puffing in the cool air, his gleaming chestnut mane shimmering under the sunlight. The wind whispered through the savanna, carrying the scent of earth and sky. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" Keanu asked softly. Blaze didn't answer, but Keanu felt that the horse understood. The next morning, the gentle rays of the sun stretched across the fields, bathing the land in a warm golden glow. Keanu stepped onto the cabin's porch, a warm cup of coffee in his hands. He took a deep breath, letting the crisp morning air awaken his senses. In the distance, he spotted Blaze walking slowly toward the cabin. But today, something was different. Blaze wasn't alone. Keanu squinted, his heart skipping a beat. On Blaze's back, a small figure, like a child, clung tightly to him. Setting his coffee down, Keanu quickly stepped off the porch and headed toward his horse. "Blaze, what's going on?" he murmured. Blaze approached calmly, his eyes steady but his movements deliberate, as if he knew he was carrying something precious. Blaze stopped a few paces from Keanu, lowering himself carefully to allow the small figure to slide gently to the ground. It was a little boy, no more than 4 years old, who tumbled onto the grass and began to cry. His tiny hands grasped at the air, searching for something familiar. Keanu took a deep breath and moved closer. "Blaze, where did you find this child?" he asked softly, his gaze shifting from Blaze to the boy. The child's face was smudged with dirt, his cheeks flushed from tears and the morning chill. A thin jacket barely shielded his trembling body from the cold. Keanu knelt, keeping his voice gentle. "Hey there, buddy. Are you okay? Where did you come from?" The boy didn't respond, his tear-filled eyes locking onto Keanu's before shifting to Blaze. Blaze lay down beside the boy, his massive body a protective wall, emitting a low, soothing sound as if to assure the child that he was safe now. Keanu exhaled, glancing at Blaze before whispering, "You really outdid yourself this time." Then, turning his attention back to the boy, he extended a hand. "It's all right, kiddo. You're safe now." The boy hesitated, his small frame shaking, before placing his tiny fingers into Keanu's warm hand. Keanu's heart tightened at the innocent trust in that simple gesture. Gently, Keanu scooped the boy into his arms and carried him into the cabin, a modest space with a worn-out couch, a tiny kitchen, and a table cluttered with maps and notes. Blaze nudged his head through the doorway, peering intently at the child. Keanu grabbed a blanket from a corner, wrapping it around the boy's shivering frame as he placed him on the couch. The boy had stopped crying, but his eyes remained wary. Keanu sat on the floor in front of the couch, meeting the boy's gaze. "What's your name, buddy?" he asked softly. The boy didn't reply, only looking at him with wide, tearful eyes and trembling lips. Keanu gave a small smile. "That's okay. No rush." He stood, glancing at Blaze. "Any idea where he came from?" Blaze blinked slowly, his tail swishing lightly. Keanu stepped into the kitchen, grabbing some crackers and peanut butter, and returned with them on a plate. "Here you go, these are good," he said, setting the plate on the table near the couch. The boy stared at it, clutching the blanket tightly. After a moment he reached out, taking a cracker and nibbling cautiously. His eyes darted between Keanu and Blaze, still nervous, but for the first time that morning, a hint of safety began to settle over him. Keanu sat on the floor, his back against the table. "This boy isn't from around here, that's for sure," he muttered to himself. There was no way a child his son's age could wander into the reserve on his own. Someone had brought him here. His thoughts raced, each one more complicated than the last. The nearest village was miles away, and the wildlife reserve wasn't a place anyone stumbled upon accidentally. Keanu's gaze shifted to Blaze. The horse lay just outside the door, his watchful eyes fixed on the child with a look that seemed almost human. The cabin was quiet, the only sound the soft crackling of the fire in the stove. Keanu perched on the edge of the couch, his elbows resting on his knees, watching the child now fast asleep, curled under the old blanket. The boy's tiny chest rose and fell steadily, his small fingers clutching a corner of the fabric as if it was the only thread keeping him tethered to safety. Blaze lay nearby, his eyes half closed but alert to Keanu's every move. The horse's calm presence filled the room, but Keanu's mind churned with unease. Questions swirled like a storm. Where had this boy come from? How had he ended up in the middle of the reserve? And what had compelled Blaze to bring him here? Keanu sighed, leaning back and running a hand through his hair. He wouldn't find answers by sitting still. The reserve's surveillance system was sparse, but cameras near the boundary might have captured something. With a quiet exhale, Keanu rose, careful not to disturb the sleeping boy. Blaze's ears twitched as Keanu crossed the room, grabbing the radio and heading to a small workstation in the corner. The equipment was outdated but functional, including a radio, maps, and monitors connected to security cameras. Keanu sank into an old wooden chair, pressing a few buttons to pull up recent footage from the northern boundary. The first clips showed only empty roads and swaying grass. Frowning, he fast-forwarded through hours of nothingness until Blaze's familiar silhouette appeared. Even in the grainy footage, his chestnut coat was unmistakable. Leaning closer, Keanu watched as Blaze moved along a dirt path, nose to the ground as if tracking something. Then, just beyond the edge of the road, the horse stopped abruptly. Keanu's breath hitched as the camera captured the small figure of the boy, sitting on the ground with his knees pulled to his chest and head bowed low. Even in the low-quality video, Keanu could see the boy's shoulders shaking with sobs. Blaze approached cautiously, each step deliberate, as though understanding the child's fragility. He lowered his head to get a closer look. But then, another shadow appeared in the frame. Keanu's hands clenched as he recognized the shape of a wild horse, lean but aggressive, emerging from the tall grass. Its movements were slow and predatory, ears pinned back, eyes locked on the sobbing boy, who remained oblivious to the approaching threat. Keanu's breath quickened as the wild horse lowered its head, preparing to strike. But Blaze rose to his full height, his tail lashing behind him. A powerful, commanding neigh erupted from him, shaking the screen. The wild horse froze, just feet from the boy. The child cowered, curling tighter into himself. Blaze charged, his powerful body colliding with the wild horse mere inches from the boy. Dust flew into the air as the two animals clashed, their cries echoing through the reserve. The wild horse reared, striking out violently, but Blaze held his ground, driving it back. The boy remained huddled against a tree, trembling while the struggle continued. Finally, with one last blow, Blaze forced the intruder to retreat into the tall grass. Keanu sat motionless, holding his breath without realizing it. He rewound the footage, watching it again, his expression a mix of disbelief and awe. When Blaze turned around, his massive frame blocked all signs of the child. The horse carefully sniffed the boy, as if reassuring himself that the child wasn't injured. Then, with a gentleness that belied his earlier fierceness, Blaze lowered himself and nudged his head against the boy. The boy's trembling hands reached out, touching the smooth mane of the horse. Blaze softly knelt down. The boy seemed to understand, clinging to the sturdy body of the horse as he climbed up. The scene ended with Blaze galloping down the road, his stride steady and determined, carrying the boy along. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his heart still racing from witnessing Blaze's act of protection. It was like seeing a part of himself in the horse, that fierce instinct to protect, unable to stand idly by when someone vulnerable was in danger. "He's always full of surprises," Keanu murmured, glancing at Blaze, now lying on the porch with his head resting on the doorstep. Blaze's tail flicked lazily, his dark eyes gleaming with quiet wisdom. Keanu's gaze shifted to the boy sleeping on the couch, his small face peaceful in the dim light. Sitting at his desk, illuminated only by the faint glow of his computer screen, Keanu's face bore the deep lines of worry. The cabin was silent, save for the occasional crackling of the fire and the steady breathing of the child. Keanu leaned back, rubbing his temples as the footage replayed on the screen. It was the third time he had watched it, yet the heavy feeling in his chest refused to ease. But then, hope began to surface as Keanu reviewed another piece of footage. This one, from 2 nights earlier, showed an old car approaching the northern boundary of the reserve. Keanu squinted, trying to adjust the resolution, but the image remained grainy. A young woman emerged from the car carrying a child, the very boy now wrapped in a blanket inside the cabin. Keanu's chest tightened as he watched her. Her movements were quick and urgent, as though she were racing against an invisible clock. She slipped through a weak spot in the fence that Keanu had just patched the week before. She placed the child on the ground, kneeling to whisper something to him. Her hand lingered on his cheek, her thumb gently stroking his soft skin. She kissed his forehead before abruptly standing, stepping back with her entire body trembling. Keanu stared at the screen, his chest feeling impossibly heavy. The car sped away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake, and Harry was left alone, small and helpless. Keanu paused the footage, his eyes fixed on the image of the boy crying. "She wasn't cruel or heartless," he murmured. "She was full of love and pain. Desperation drives people to impossible choices." He glanced at the sleeping boy in the armchair, a quiet strength seeming to emanate from him. "You're stronger than most," Keanu said softly, his voice barely a whisper in the stillness. Blaze stirred, lifting his head to look at Keanu, his eyes holding a wisdom that seemed to transcend instinct, as if he understood the weight of what Keanu had just seen. "I don't know which is worse," Keanu said quietly. "Leaving you behind or knowing she felt like she had no other choice." Blaze exhaled a deep sigh, resting his head on his paws, while the faint crackle of the radio broke the silence. Keanu reached out, tuning the reserve's main channel. He needed to report this and start figuring out who this boy was and where he belonged. Keanu gently pulled the blanket tighter around Harry, the name he had just decided on for the boy. Harry shifted slightly, his face relaxing as he sighed in his sleep. Keanu whispered, "We'll keep you safe." Blaze's tail flicked once, a silent agreement, and for the first time that night, Keanu felt a glimmer of hope. The next morning, the air around the reserve was crisp and quiet, as if the world were holding its breath before the day began. Keanu leaned against the railing of his cabin's porch, watching Blaze amble toward the distant watering hole, his glossy chestnut coat glowing under the first rays of sunlight. Inside the cabin, Harry sat cross-legged on the couch, his small fingers tracing the patterns on the blanket draped over his knees. He wasn't crying anymore, not like that first night, but there was still a fragile uncertainty in his eyes that Keanu couldn't ignore. Keanu stepped inside the cabin, careful not to startle the boy. "You hungry?" he asked, his voice low and soothing. Harry looked up, blinking before nodding slightly. "All right, let's see what we've got," Keanu said, moving to the small kitchen and rummaging through the cabinets. "I'm not much of a cook, but I can do toast and eggs. How does that sound?" Another small nod. Keanu got to work, the smell of toasting bread and sizzling eggs filling the air. Harry slowly slid off the couch and made his way to the window, standing on tiptoe to peer outside at the expanse of land where Blaze was lying near the water's edge. "Don't worry about him," Keanu said, placing a plate of food on the table. "Blaze is as gentle as they come. He'll keep an eye on you." Harry hesitated, his gaze darting between Keanu and the plate, before climbing onto a chair and nibbling at a piece of toast. Keanu sat across from him, giving the boy space but staying close enough to offer reassurance. The first days passed quietly. Keanu moved at a slow pace, letting Harry set the rhythm. He knew the boy had been through something no child should ever endure, and pushing too hard wouldn't help. Meanwhile, Blaze seemed to have his own way of connecting with Harry. The horse took up a familiar spot near the cabin, lying in the shade during the day and just under the window at night. Keanu smiled the first time he saw Harry tiptoeing outside, clutching the blanket tightly. Blaze lifted his head, ears swiveling but otherwise staying still as the boy approached. A few days later, Harry was sitting beside Blaze, his small hand resting on the horse's flank. One afternoon, as the golden sunlight bathed the savannah, Keanu saw Harry and Blaze near the watering hole. The boy's laughter rang out, a sound Keanu hadn't heard before. Blaze flicked his tail back and forth, patiently letting Harry climb over and around him. Keanu watched from a distance, warmth spreading through his chest. As the days passed, Harry's laughter became part of the reserve, bringing Keanu not only a sense of responsibility, but also a sense of belonging. One evening, as the three of them sat on the porch watching the sun set, Keanu found himself thinking about the future. Harry had fallen asleep, his head resting against Blaze's side, while the horse lay completely still beneath him. The scene was so peaceful it almost made Keanu forget the questions still lingering in his mind. Where would Harry go from here? The authorities were still searching for answers, but Keanu knew the system wasn't kind to children like him. He glanced at Blaze, who met his gaze with quiet understanding. "We're a strange little family, aren't we?" Keanu murmured. Though Blaze didn't react, the slow flick of his tail felt like an agreement. Keanu exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. Harry spent his mornings trailing behind Keanu on patrol, excitedly pointing out birds and horses, asking Keanu endless questions about the animals. "What's that one's name?" Harry asked one afternoon, pointing to a wild horse grazing in the distance. "That's just a horse," Keanu replied, smiling. "They're wild and quick." Harry nodded solemnly, then added, "Do you think Blaze likes them?" Keanu chuckled, glancing at the horse standing nearby. "I think Blaze likes watching them, and let's hope it stays that way." In moments like these, Keanu felt his doubts dissolve, replaced by a sense of warmth and certainty. Life at the wildlife sanctuary didn't pause for paperwork, and Keanu found himself juggling the duties of a ranger with the newly discovered role of a father. He had taught Harry the basics of tracking, showing him how to read hoofprints left by warthogs and jackals. At night, he pointed out the constellations sparkling across the savannah sky, and together they spent quiet evenings on the porch tracing the stars with their fingers. Harry brought a new energy to the sanctuary. His laughter echoed as he ran alongside Blaze down dusty trails, arms outstretched like an airplane. Blaze, as usual, indulged him, trotting gently until Harry eventually climbed onto his back, clinging to the horse with squeals of delight. Keanu watched those moments with a mix of pride and an emotion he couldn't quite name. They weren't just surviving. They were thriving. One evening, as they sat together watching the sun dip below the horizon, Harry turned to Keanu, his wide eyes serious. "Will I have to leave?" he asked softly. Keanu's heart clenched. He set his coffee mug down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "No, kid. I won't let that happen," he said, his voice steady. Harry studied him for a moment, then nodded, his small shoulders relaxing. He climbed into Keanu's lap, nestling his head against his chest. Keanu wrapped his arms tightly around the boy, while Blaze lay at their feet, exhaling a satisfied sigh. Days turned into weeks, and as the adoption process crept forward, Keanu felt the bond between them grow stronger. Harry's presence filled the cabin with a warmth Keanu hadn't realized he'd been missing. Every night, as he tucked Harry into bed, Keanu felt a quiet certainty settle over him. He'd made the right choice. No matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. One morning, with the crisp air outside the courthouse brushing against his skin, Keanu stepped out, one hand holding the door open while the other rested protectively on Harry's shoulder. In his pocket was a piece of paper that changed everything, a court order with his name next to Harry's, officially sealing what both of them had known in their hearts for months. "Can we go tell Blaze?" Harry asked, his voice bright with excitement. Keanu smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "I think Blaze has been waiting for this news just as much as we have." They returned to the sanctuary, and when they arrived, they found Blaze standing under the shade of an acacia tree near the watering hole. The horse lifted his head as the jeep approached, ears pricking forward as though sensing something special. Harry scrambled out of the jeep before it had fully stopped, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Dust rose in small clouds around his sneakers as he ran toward Blaze. "Blaze!" Harry shouted, his voice carrying across the vast savannah. The horse rose to his full height, his powerful frame moving with effortless grace. As Harry drew near, Blaze dipped his head, allowing the boy to wrap his arms around his strong neck and thick mane. Keanu stood back, watching the scene unfold. Blaze gave a soft rumble, his tail swishing lazily. The sight stirred something deep in Keanu's chest, a mix of pride, gratitude, and quiet awe. "We did it," Keanu murmured, almost to himself. "We really did it." As the sun sank low in the sky, painting the savannah in warm hues of orange and gold, the three of them sat by the watering hole. Harry leaned against Blaze, his small frame dwarfed by the horse's massive body, while Keanu sat cross-legged on the grass, a warm cup of coffee in hand. "Do you want to know how Blaze and I met?" Keanu asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Harry looked up, his eyes shining with curiosity. "You've never told me." Keanu smiled, taking a sip of his coffee before setting the cup down. "It was a long time ago. Back when I first started here at the sanctuary, I was still figuring out what I was doing. One day I found a young horse all alone. His mother had been killed by poachers and he had no one to take care of him." Harry's hand absent-mindedly stroked Blaze's mane, his expression thoughtful. "Right, Blaze? That's right. Keanu nodded. Back then, he was just a little guy, smaller than you are now. I didn't know if I could help him, but I couldn't just leave him there. So I brought him back to the cabin, fed him, kept him warm, and taught him how to survive. Harry tilted his head. Why did you let him go? Keanu's smile faltered for a moment, his gaze shifting to the horizon. Because love sometimes means letting someone find their own way. But Blaze never really left. He always came back. Harry nodded, his small hand gripping a tuft of Blaze's mane tightly. I never want to leave. Keanu felt his throat tighten. He reached out to ruffle Harry's hair. Lucky for you, you're stuck with me, and Blaze too. As the stars began to dot the night sky, Keanu couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since that fateful day, when Blaze brought Harry into his life. Together they had found something neither had been searching for but both desperately needed, a family. The sanctuary had always been his home, but now it was more than that, a place of safety, love, and second chances. Keanu glanced at Harry, who had fallen asleep beside Blaze, his small face peaceful in the dim light. He looked at Blaze, who met his gaze with a quiet understanding. No words needed. This is it, Keanu murmured. This is everything. Blaze swished his tail lazily, the gesture as familiar and comforting as the rhythm of life itself. Keanu leaned back, letting the night enfold them. Whatever the future held, he knew they would face it together. This was their family, their home, and their story, and it was only just beginning. The silence of the savannah countryside stretched late into the night, broken only by the occasional rustle of grass in the wind and the rhythmic hum of insects. Keanu sat on the porch with a steaming cup of coffee, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The cabin was quiet, but his mind was not. He had just finished a call with Child Welfare Services, and the weight of their words pressed heavily on his chest. They had said they hadn't found Harry's family yet, and without additional leads, the best option would be to place him in a group home. The words were delivered kindly, but they still felt like a punch to Keanu's gut. He sipped his coffee, his eyes shifting to the porch where Blaze lay sprawled out. Through the open window, Keanu could hear Harry humming softly to himself as he colored at the kitchen table. He couldn't imagine Harry in a group home, especially not after the past few weeks, where the boy had slowly found his place here. Harry's laughter had grown louder, his steps more confident. Keanu set his mug down, his fingers drumming lightly against the rough wood of the railing. Can I really do this? The thought had crossed his mind before, but now it loomed larger and more tangible. Adopting Harry would mean stepping into a world of paperwork and legal hurdles, not to mention learning how to be a father. The idea scared him, but not as much as the thought of Harry having to leave Blaze behind, Keanu murmured, looking at Blaze. I think I can do this. Blaze blinked slowly, his tail giving its usual lazy wag whenever Keanu spoke to him. Keanu shook his head with a soft laugh. You're no help, you know that. That night, Keanu lay awake long after the house had gone dark. The steady sound of Harry's breathing beside him was a small comfort, but didn't stop the questions from running through his mind. What kind of life could he give this boy? Would it be enough? Keanu thought back to the first time he found Blaze, a scrawny and frail horse, and how little he knew about taking care of such a large animal. But they had figured it out together, hadn't they? Maybe this wouldn't be so different. By the time the sun began to rise, Keanu had made up his mind. That decision marked the beginning of a new challenge. Keanu had always felt more at ease with nature than with people, and navigating the adoption process made him feel like a fish out of water. The interviews, the evaluations, and the piles of paperwork riddled with legal jargon left his head spinning. But whenever he felt overwhelmed, all he had to do was look at Harry, The boy had blossomed in ways Keanu hadn't expected, with steps that were now quick and purposeful. Life sometimes takes us down paths we never anticipated, but it's those paths that lead us to where we truly belong. For Keanu, Blaze, and Harry, they didn't just find a family, they found themselves. Did this story move you or remind you of someone in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and follow to stay updated with more stories like this. And if you've experienced a meaningful journey like Keanu, Blaze, and Harry, we'd love to hear your story.